What we just heard is the end of the Gospel of Mark, except for one verse. However, if we picked up our Bibles, we would see that there's more that follows. But every scholar, every scholar would say this is the end. And people were uncomfortable with the end because there were no resurrection appearances that Mark had. And they're not really sure why. It could have been lost, the manuscript could have been lost, or all sorts of reasons. But there's still a lot we can learn from this gospel, the end of the Gospel of Mark. The young man directs the women to tell the disciples to go back to Galilee. Galilee is where their discipleship began. That's where Jesus called them. And then it is there that they will see him. Now we know for sure from other gospel accounts that the disciples did indeed encounter Jesus risen from the dead, just shattering any expectations they could have ever had. And we can be sure of the truth of the resurrection of Jesus by the radical change that happened in the disciples' lives. They were completely changed and fearless. They were willing to proclaim that Jesus was alive, had risen from the dead. They would do that to the point of being killed by others as martyrs. There's another really important proof that Jesus indeed rose from the dead. Right here. We would not be here on March 31st, 2018, if Jesus had not risen from the dead. How could anyone pass on a faith that did not have the kind of hope and the joy that we have? How could it have come for 2018 years if it wasn't true that Jesus rose from the dead? So, hopefully that is a side that we know that perhaps Mark does actually end his gospel this way, so that we who read it and reflect on it know that we must constantly go back to where we began. For them, it was Galilee. For us, it's our baptism. And that's what we celebrate so powerfully on the Easter Vigil and all of the Easter season. What brought the disciples to this point, to the Jesus death, and then now hearing the news of resurrection, was all through their public ministry. They had a hard time understanding Jesus. They did not want him in the end to go to Jerusalem. They knew there was trouble. And when he was arrested, they abandoned him. Peter, for a while, tried to stay close, but he too fell through and denied Jesus, denied that he ever even knew the man. Despite all this, Jesus says to the women, tell them to go back to Galilee where it all began, and there they will see me. They will see me risen from the dead, and then finally understand. So in a similar fashion, we hear Paul saying to the Christians in Rome in the epistle reading, remember, you were baptized into his death. So Paul is saying, remember to you and to me, you were baptized into Jesus' death. Therefore, you will also share his resurrection. Let us go back to the beginning where we began. So no matter what has transpired in our lives this past year or our whole life, whatever trials, hardships, or joys, we need to go back where it all began for us, our baptism into the very life of God, into his saving death and resurrection. Just throw ourselves into God's life. And in renewing our baptism, we find forgiveness, we find mercy, and we find new life. So we may have some bad memories of this past year or other past years, but now Jesus is saying, let it go. Go back to where you and I began. Go back to your baptism and know that you are called as a child of God. You have my life within you, and renew it here at this altar. It is by God's grace that we are on a path to become saints, as Dr. Wood told us in our mission over and over. As Matthew Kelly says over and over, we're called to become the best version of ourselves that we can be in body, mind, and spirit. The Lord is alive. He is with us and it can help make that possible and help change the world. That is why Easter is such a great feast of joy and hope. We die to our past, and we move forward in hope. Alleluia.